The final verse of Be Thou My Vision, the hymn we just sang, points toward our topic today. The song gives us this vision of God that's transcendent and yet ever present. I want you to listen again to the words of the final verse. Riches I heed not, nor world's empty praise. Thou my inheritance now and always. Thou and thou only, first in my heart, sovereign of heaven, my treasure thou art. It's saying that God, the holy, the mystery beyond all our naming that we hold in our hearts is far more valuable than any riches or praise. It's our eternal inheritance. This economy is not based on compensation and recognition for work done, but on something deeper and more meaningful. Today's an interesting day to be reflecting on such matters, considering that tomorrow is Labor Day, a federal holiday recognizing the contributions of workers to our nation's well-being. It's also in some ways the unofficial end of summer, a time when the pace of life picks up again after the relative slowdown of the summer. Our society is in the midst of a sea change in how people view their work. Many factors have contributed to this change. Pandemic work-from-home culture, the strain that the pandemic placed on families and its impact on mental health, the demands placed on workers and the constant adaptation required to live in this time, generational differences and perspectives on burnout, crippling student debt, which our country is finally finding ways to relieve, but not to the extent truly necessary, and the awakening that many have experienced, realizing that their lives and the lives of their loved ones are finite and wishing to make the most of the time they are given. It feels like a new labor movement is afoot, in which workers expect to be paid for what they do, are drawing more boundaries around work hours, and are rejecting exploitative practices. We are reevaluating how work fits into our lives rather than stressing about how to fit life around work. In the past couple weeks, the hashtag quiet quitting has emerged as a way of describing this workplace trend. And in response, there has emerged a chorus of voices saying the term quiet quitting is offensive and unfair. Because, as Amina Kilpatrick points out in an article for NPR, the term suggests that people who do their work have quit their job. Quiet quitting doesn't actually involve quitting, she explains. Employees are quitting, going above and beyond, and declining to do tasks they're not being paid for, calling for a more just and less exploitative workplace culture. Every day, I hold the tension between knowing that boundaries are important and feeling the pressure of many shoulds. I imagine that some of you can relate to this. The feeling that you are the center that must hold, that you must do something because someone has to, because if not me, then who? I come by it honestly, being raised in a family that fought over who would do the dishes. Not because no one wanted to do the dishes, but because everyone wanted to be useful. The desire to be of use is, I believe, a very human impulse. It's to be wanted and needed, to contribute something of value, and to be recognized for those contributions. In her poem, To Be of Use, Marge Piercy writes of those who do what has to be done again and again, who submerge in the task, who move in a common rhythm when something must be accomplished. The work of the world is as common as mud, she writes. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. As a church, we have returned to this poem often, in worship, in blessing leaders and those who give their time so generously, doing work as common as mud to make this church what it is. We return to it often because it's an important reminder, and because it prompts us to reflect. What is work that is real? On this Labor Day weekend, I invite us to ask ourselves again, what is my real work? To ask this question is also to ask, what am I called to do and be? This is a deeply spiritual question that goes far beyond what should I do to pay the bills. For me, and perhaps for you, the many shoulds that I carry are not, for the most part, my real work. How do we know which shoulds are worth listening to? Christian theologian Frederick Buechner put it this way: there are all different kinds of voices calling you to all different kinds of work. And the problem is to find out which is the voice of God rather than of society, say, or the superego or self-interest. By and large, a good rule for finding out is this: the kind of work God usually calls you to is the kind of work that you need most to do and that the world most needs to have done. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet is a place of meaningful work, of real work. Work that connects your passion and what you have to offer with the needs and the opportunity present. Buechner's words, I know, helped guide me very much as I embraced my call to ministry. While writing this sermon, I got a message from a church member who was in a moral quandary, seeking a listening ear and some advice. I'll keep this general in order to maintain confidentiality, but also because I think it's a situation that many of us find ourselves in at some point in our lives. They were being asked to help someone who was in trouble, but felt like what was being asked of them was too much. How could they be of use? And what was their real work in this situation? Was it to bail the person out without hope of actually fixing the situation, or to show care and concern while also setting boundaries? I think of as I listened to this person share this, it made me think of stories that I have heard from many of you about friends, family, or coworkers in trouble with the law or struggling with addiction or mental illness. I think of stories I've heard from you about your jobs and working yourselves to the point of exhaustion and burnout because you wanted to be of use, to help others, because the need was so great. The answer is not always to do more. Sometimes it's the space that you hold that is most real and meaningful. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu writes about this space. There's many translations, and this is one. He writes, 30 spokes together make a wheel for a cart. It's the empty space in the center which enables it to be used. Mold clay into a vessel, it is the emptiness within that creates the usefulness of the vessel. Cut out the doors and windows in a house, it is the empty space inside that creates the usefulness of the house. Thus, what we have may be something substantial, but its usefulness lies in the unoccupied, empty space. Another translation of these last couple lines is, therefore, profit comes from what is there, usefulness from what is not there. According to this understanding, the unoccupied space is the source of usefulness. It's the space of the Spirit. It's the space of our real work. Discerning our real work and aligning our lives with it is a process of shaping our lives such that we are vessels for real and meaningful things. Just as amphoras and vases and bowls and pitchers are shaped to be of use, to hold something nourishing or beautiful, we can shape our lives to hold space for ourselves and for others to grow. How we shape our life depends on our stage of life. As we grow older, we oscillate between times when we're focused more internally, asking, who am I and what am I passionate about? What will bring more meaning to my life? And times when we're focused more externally, asking, what do I have to give? How can I help others build meaningful lives? Discerning our real work is not only for the young who are starting out on their own, figuring out how they want to contribute to the world. Those who are getting older, maybe retiring from their careers and moving into a different stage of life, must still ask themselves, what is my real work? As Parker Palmer puts it in On the Brink of Everything, his book about aging, the junk I need to jettison in my old age is psychological junk, such as long-time convictions about what gives my life meaning that no longer serve me well. Who will I be when I can no longer do the work that has been a primary source of identity for me for the past half-century, he asks. He concludes that the question he must ask himself now is, what do I want to let go of, and what do I want to give myself to? You know that phenomenon that occurs when you get a new car and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere? Does that sound familiar? That happened to me this week, but it was about the sermon topic of real work. Everywhere I went and everyone I talked to seemed to bring up something relevant to the topic. I learned this week from one family in the church about a practice that they call Think Pit. They practice it most often on family camping trips when they're sitting around a fire by a lake, all thinking on a question and sharing their answers. One time their question was, besides your work, how do you want to be remembered? I love this question because it gets to the difference between the wheel and the open center, the pitcher and the space within, the profit and the usefulness, the body and the life that inhabits it, the work and what is real at its core, what we hold on to and what we give ourselves to. We are remembered for what we give. All those so-called quiet quitters are giving themselves to sustainability, to the well-being of themselves and others, to justice. It sure doesn't sound like quitting to me. It sounds like they're getting clear about what their real work is and should be. And this is something all of us can learn from. The quiet quitters are also rejecting the deep-rooted theology that pervades our society that we can trace all the way back to the Protestant Reformation and John Calvin. Calvin's theology of predestination said that the fate of all souls, whether they were destined for heaven or hell, was determined by God at the very beginning, and there was nothing we could do in this life to change it. But what people did with that theology was they spent their lives working very hard to prove that they were among the elect destined for heaven. They linked a person's essential worthiness with their productivity. Unitarians and Universalists have both rejected Calvinist theology, affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person rather than that value coming from what they do and how hard they work. And yet the connection between our worthiness and our work remains deeply ingrained in all who have inherited Protestant culture, and this includes Unitarian Universalism. This is why it's so important that, among other things, we continue to lift up and affirm our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all people, along with our seventh principle, which recognizes our interdependence and that we're part of something much larger than ourselves. Perhaps this is why we love and return to Marge Piercy's poem so much. She speaks of people submerged in the task, moving in common rhythm and doing what is worth doing. We're part of something larger, and the work we do together is worthy and good. It's an end, not just a means to an end or a means to justify our goodness. Discerning this good work is a process of listening to the voices surrounded within us, the voices of need and the still small voice of God or conscience, focusing in on what is real. We're in this together. And so it is good that you're here, part of this community of love and discernment and action, this community where we lift up what is of worth and are empowered to act on it. where we know that those actions impact ourselves and others, and that the well-being of our interdependent web depends on all of us. How can you be of use in a way that connects your gladness with the world's need? What is the real work that you are called to in this life? May you discover it in yourself, give of yourself, and be remembered for the goodness and meaning that you have shared with the world. Amen.